I'm Steve Johnson, News Director of theDove TV. Watch more videos from the Dove Newsroom at thedove.us.
Well, welcome back. What an honor to have with us today Dr. Paul Kengor. He's an author. He's written some books that are bestsellers. 11 Principles of a Reagan Conservative, The Crusader, Ronald Reagan and the Fall of Communism and the Communists, Frank Marshall Davis, The Untold Story of Barack Obama, just to mention a few. Perhaps you've read some of his articles in the USA Today or New York Times, but he's written a book that I think is a manual. It's called Takedown, and from the communists to the progressives, how the left has sabotaged family and marriage. Wow. Dr. Paul, good to see you, my friend. How are you?
Good, Perry. Good to be back. Thanks.
Yeah. Wow. What provoked this book?
Yeah. No, and I've had friends who've said to me, hey, why do you want to step into this culture war issue, right? And because I'm a Cold War historian, I focus on communism, radical ideologies, totalitarianism, socialism, progressivism, conservatism. And really, Perry, it's because of that background that I've unfortunately waded into this, because when I teach my students about the Communist Manifesto, and we actually read it, we don't just say, it's a pretty good book if you just go and read it, and then you don't read it. So we actually read it, and there's a line in there that says abolition of the family. And they go, abolition of the family, what does that mean? Professor, what does that mean? So obviously you discuss what it means. You talk about Marx and his family life, which was horrid. Talk about Engels and his family life, which was non-existent. In fact, Marx wrote to Engels, "Blessed is he who has no family." How's that for a take on the Beatitudes? Wow. And so I discuss that with my students, and then we back up. We talk about the radical socialist utopians like Charles Fourier, Robert Owen, before Marx and Engels, and they were producing ideological colonies in America in the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, and they were trying to redefine family and marriage. So what I know is that this movement today to redefine marriage through gay marriage is nothing new. It is new in that nobody ever before in history, including the most radical Marxists, ever thought of two men or two women marrying each other. But the idea of breaking down natural, traditional, biblical model of marriage and family, of rebelling against the idea of a fixed model ordained by a creator, that's been going on for a long time. And what's really new is that communists and radicals who for a couple centuries have been trying to do that have finally founded in all things a vehicle to make it happen. And the typical same-sex marriage supporter, who's obviously not a communist, the typical same-sex marriage supporter has no idea about these deeper, darker ideological historical forces that for whom their advocacy of same-sex marriage actually fits to some degree this reshaping and redefining of marriage and family that these more radical forces have long wanted to do.
All right. I guess we can get into the history of this, which is really incredible. But there's a spiritual dimension to this, Paul, and that is that if there's an attack, or at least an attempt to abolish the traditional family, isn't that kind of like a stick in God's eye? We want him to go away?
Oh, sure. And in fact, I got a call from a reporter last week, Perry, who's read this book and said, you point out how communists are today, right now, they weren't 200 years ago, but today, they're absolutely wildly gung-ho for gay marriage and the whole LGBT agenda. He said, well, get this. You probably don't check this stuff out, but if you go to the website of the Satanist Temple, which I don't recommend that people do, it's a very dark thing, but if you go there, you'll see that they're totally behind same-sex marriage too. And in fact, I went there and I looked at it, and they are. And apparently they've had priestesses doing same-sex ceremonies for years. And they're also wild about abortion, by the way, too. But that, and again, this doesn't in any way, people, please don't misunderstand me. In no way does this mean the typical same-sex marriage supporter is a Satanist. Obviously, they're not. but you would expect Satanists to embrace what to them is a violation of God's original plan for male-female marriage. So some really radical, sinister forces are in that camp. They're not behind it. They didn't create same-sex marriage. They're not leading the effort. But it's interesting that they're firmly behind it.
All right, so do you have any idea why, I mean, this has been going on since the beginning of time, I guess, but why the leftists or the progressive, maybe even those who would be in the communistic camp, do you think they know why they're against traditional family?
Well, really my specialty are the radical leftists and the far left. And for communists being totalitarians, I mean, ask any professor who does lectures on totalitarianism, and what every totalitarian wants to do is fundamentally transform human nature. In fact, I always write that on the board for my students. Totalitarians transform human nature. And if you're going to transform human nature, if you're going to take down the West and the Judeo-Christian world and value system, then you got to start with the absolute bedrock, the most fundamental thing, most fundamental building block of the West and of Judeo-Christian society, and that's the family. It's also God, which is why the communists in particular, I mean, when Marx and Engels and the Bolsheviks weren't writing about attacking the family, they were calling religion the opiate of the masses. Marx said communism begins where atheism begins. Lenin said there's nothing more abominable than religion. Lenin said all worship of a divinity is a necrophilia. That's what Lenin said about religion. So for them, attacking religion, attacking family, attacking marriage, it's absolutely fundamental to remaking society in their own image, which is a fundamentally anti-God image.
Dr. Paul, this issue is now splitting the church. Now, I don't think that the church universal is against family, but the church, elements of the church has bought into the lie that the gay marriage thing is okay. In other words, it's love. After all, it's love, and God is love. And I did a show with a counselor about all that, which is pretty interesting, which follows that pattern. But this is splitting the church. So what's the church to do in allowing marriage to be redefined right in front of it?
Yeah, well, I still think that most Christians, or well, certainly I should say most denominations, well, far and away, do not support same-sex marriage. I know the Episcopal Church now does. My former denomination, Presbyterian Church USA, has moved in that direction. I think maybe the United Church of Christ, although I don't want to misrepresent it, people can easily check this. But the Roman Catholic Church is holding firm. Pope Francis, for all the criticisms of him on ecology, economy, redistribution of wealth, and so forth, is absolutely solid on family and marriage. In fact, he said same-sex marriage is a product of the father of lies. He called it diabolical. And I think most conservative, evangelical, independent churches are against same-sex marriage. But there's a lot of Christians who favor it, and that's going to be used against faithful Christians who oppose same-sex marriage. I'm already getting emails from gay rights people, pro same-sex marriage people saying, well, you say that you're against same-sex marriage because you have a Christian belief on it. Well, I got a poll right here that says that 55% of the people of whatever who identify as Christians support same-sex marriage. So your position, Kengor, isn't a Christian position on marriage. It's a hate position on marriage. So that's the kind of problem that religious left and I would say confused Christians who can't understand the Genesis account, Jesus speaking in Matthew, quoting the Genesis account, God made them male and female, and what God has put together, man has no right to tear asunder. I think this is pretty clear. Despite what Jimmy Carter says, You don't need to pluck out a verse somewhere in Corinthians that says no same-sex marriage. They weren't even thinking about that. Why would there be a verse strictly prohibiting that? I mean, no culture ever, other than our own people in modern times, contemplated this idea. So of course you're not going to find a Bible verse that explicitly forbidding same-sex marriage. People didn't do that. Even the ancient Greeks and Romans, where bisexuality was tolerated, homosexuality was, a man who was bisexual or homosexual was expected at some point to marry a woman and raise a family. Sorry, Perry, that's a long answer to your question, but
no.
Yeah, liberal Christians are going to create a lot of problems for faithful Christians on this question.
Well, I got to take a break before I do, though. We're in a corner, Paul. We're in a corner. I mean, the church is in a corner, and now truth is hate speech. What are we to do? What are we to do?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Let me take a quick break with
Sure.
Dr. Paul Kengor, and get this book called Takedown. You can get it at Amazon. And Dr. Kengor, PhD, From Communist to Progressive and How the Left Has Sabotaged Family and Marriage. I think you not only find it to be, well, first of all, it's a manual. I think if you need some good material to help you defend what you believe, get a hold of this book. It'll help you understand it. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, and our special guest today, and what a delight to have him back with us, Dr. Paul Kengor. He's author several books. We're talking to him about his latest book called Takedown, and there's a picture of it on the screen. You may want to check it out at Amazon. It is put out by WND Books, and let me encourage you to get a copy of this, and it deals with From Communism to Progressives, How the Left Has Sabotaged Family and the Marriage. Paul, you know what's interesting here is that you would think that the Islamic community, the Muslim community, would have been with us on the Supreme Court battle to keep marriage defined as one man and one woman. They were totally silent, while at the same time their own philosophy on life abhors homosexuality. So was their silence a way for them to get what they ultimately want, and that's polygamy?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, look, in the UN, battles in the UN, especially during the Bush years, when on these family issues, the Republican administrations could usually count on the support of Muslim countries and the Vatican, right? and so they could usually count on them on pro-life issues and so forth. And Muslims clearly support, let's just say, male-female marriage. But as I say in this book, redefining marriage in America is anything but one man and one woman. If your argument is that consenting adults who love each other ought to be able to get married, that love wins, and that should determine whether or not you have marriage, and that you have the ability to redefine marriage, then I think this inevitably leads to polygamy. And I think it will lead to a situation where a Muslim man at some point in America can take 3, 4, 5 wives, however you want to interpret the passages from the Quran. And for liberals who are shaking their fist and yelling at the screen right now and saying, well, that's not true, that's not what we want. Well, it might not be what you want, but remember, you're a marriage redefiner. And you've set out to say that you have the ability to render unto yourself what heretofore was the province of the laws of nature, and nature is God. You believe that you can redefine marriage, and that no one should be able to tell you or argue with your redefinition of marriage. So that being the case, when several people come to you and they say, we're in love and we want to get married together, then who are you going to be to say that they can't do that? Because remember, you favor marriage redefinition. Now me, I don't. I mean, my standard on marriage has been the same for the Western world for 2,000 years. So I'll stick to my standard. I'll be just fine. But as for you, you've opened the door. You've allowed this to happen. And so, you same-sex marriage supporters out there, be careful what you wish for, because you put forward a change here that, but by sheer logical consistency, is irreversible.
By the way, that also opens the door for pedophilia, because some religions allow it to go down to young girls, you know, the Islamic faith being one of them. At least their history shows that. So that's another issue that's going to come on our plate. Let me ask you this, Paul. It appears that this decision by the U.S. Supreme Court was anything but constitutional. If anything, it was lawless. And we could argument the merits of that, but you in particular apparently have some inside thinking about Justice Anthony Kennedy. Now, he comes from my hometown, Sacramento, at the George School of Law, which I never got into. I tried to get into that school and couldn't get in. Thank God I didn't. But anyway, what's your thoughts? What happened to him?
Well, you might have been okay to go to school there back then, because Kennedy was fairly orthodox back then. I mean, Ronald Reagan appointed him. Ronald Reagan's closest advisor, Bill Clark, who served with Kennedy on the bench in Sacramento. Kennedy was on the federal bench, and Clark was on the California State Supreme Court. I knew Clark very well. I'm his biographer. He died a couple of years ago, and he and Reagan both thought that they were getting pretty much a strict constructionist in Kennedy's case. And Kennedy's been pretty good on states' rights as well, but on some of these social issues, he's been really bad. And really, Perry, the answer to how Kennedy was going to vote on June 26, 2015, with his gay marriage decision, you can find it in 1992 in a decision called Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which ruled against Governor Casey, a pro-life Democrat in the state of Pennsylvania, my home state, and reaffirmed Roe v. Wade as a constitutional right in all 50 states. Sound familiar, right? But Kennedy in that decision flat out said that the heart of liberty in America means being able to come up with your own definitions of existence, of life, of the universe, and of meaning itself. And by the way, that is not the American understanding of liberty. It wasn't the founding fathers' understanding of liberty. It's not a Christian understanding of liberty. Kennedy, who's Roman Catholic, it's not a Catholic understanding of liberty. That is a very radical secular understanding of liberty. Liberty isn't about the right to come up with your own meanings of meaning. You can't call a tree a dog. You can't call a cat a dog. You can't call grass trees. I mean, you know, life is life. Marriage is marriage. You can't do that sort of thing. But that's what Kennedy thinks that you can do in America. And so, really, if Kennedy believed that being an American means coming up with your own meanings of meaning, then I imagine coming up with your own definition of marriage was pretty much small potatoes after that.
You know, Francis Schaeffer writes about that in Christian Manifesto, and he dealt with the whole issue of justices being able to do what they want to do and come up with things that weren't even in law. I guess he called it the Lex Rex versus the Rex. Let's see, the Lex Rex versus the Rex Lex.
Interesting.
You know, which was the law, the king, no, the law is king, or the king is law. And that's basically what that meant. And when and so when the king becomes law, you have what we have now.
That's right. And that's a total violation of natural law. I mean, natural law argues that things like marriage, things like life itself, these are eternal. And no king, no court, no group of justices can overturn what is the eternal, universal, natural law written on the hearts of all men and women. But Kennedy believes that apparently that's not true. I mean, you could, and look, if you can come up with your own definitions of meaning, existence, life, and marriage, why not come up with your own definition of natural law while you're at it? If this is what it means to be in America today, then everything is up for reinterpretation and for redefinition, so long as you can get enough voters behind you, and even more importantly, apparently, so long as you can get 5 Supreme Court justices behind you.
You're a biographer of Ronald Reagan. I know this is somewhat hypothetical. What do you think he would think of the court today?
Yeah, he'd be very disappointed. And I've written on this. His daughter, Patty, a couple years ago, said that she believed that if her father was around today, he wouldn't stand in the way of gay marriage. And there's nothing in Reagan's background to suggest that. Now, people who know a little bit about Reagan's background know that he was tolerant of gay people, and so am I. I mean, being a Christian is about having charity. Love thy neighbor is about loving thy neighbor. But that doesn't mean that you thereby ipso facto support redefining marriage in direct violation of your faith's sacred teachings. So Ronald Reagan was very much a traditionalist, a conservative. Conservatives believe in conserving and preserving time-tested values. He was a very devout Christian, and you would expect a radical secular progressive to leap on some brand new experiment, something that's never been done before in America, like same-sex marriage. But you wouldn't expect a conservative, by mere definition of what a conservative is and believes, to suddenly jump on the wagon for redefining marriage. So Ronald Reagan, look, he never commented on same-sex marriage because it was unthinkable while he was president. But if to say that Reagan would support redefining marriage would go against all of his conservative and religious principles.
Did you ever interview Herb Ellingwood?
No, I did not, and I wish I would have. I read almost everything that he wrote about Reagan and his faith.
Okay, I knew him personally.
He was Sacramento as well, right?
Yeah. Well, I was working for KCRA Radio and TV at the time when Reagan was governor, and I got to know Herb Ellingwood very well because we were neighbors. And Herb was very much involved in, and Pat Boone were very much involved in Reagan's spiritual development, if I can say that, at least as governor. And when he became governor of California, he spent his first day in office with his office door closed, praying in his office.
Yes.
And so I would find that he would find today shocking.
Yeah, and I've received a number of emails from people, again, on the same-sex marriage side, saying, well, of course Jesus would support same-sex marriage because he said, love thy neighbor. No, love thy neighbor doesn't mean, is not a license for homosexual sex with your neighbor and redefining marriage. I mean, love thy neighbor refers to genuine Christian charity and tolerance, real tolerance, not selective tolerance like the left practices. In my book, I quote Herbert Marcuse, the cultural Marxist, who talked about repressive tolerance. And he said this in the 1960s. And he said that's the idea that people on the left should tolerate ideas from the left, but not tolerate ideas from the right. And that's what they're doing today with marriage. Although terribly, suddenly today, if you support the traditional, natural, biblical view on marriage that 99% of all people who ever bestrode the earth supported, that suddenly puts you on the right, and you shouldn't be tolerated. But genuine tolerance is called Christian charity. The kind of tolerance that the left engages in is not tolerance at all. It's a very narrow, selective tolerance at best. Demonizing and picketing and seeking to destroy people who disagree with you on redefining marriage is not tolerance.
Paul, all right, so marriage has been redefined right under our nose. We don't seem to have a good Christian response to this, other than we're letting the world define us as people of intolerance and hate. We don't seem to be pushing back from that. Divorce rates among Christians is an all-time high, unfortunately. In the state of Oregon, we got the state coming between the parents and the child. The child can go out and have an abortion. The parents don't have to know about it, but the parents' insurance can be billed, and the insurance company doesn't have to tell the parents that they've been billed. I mean, we're in a real pickle here.
Yes.
And what do you say to this? What do you say to this?
It's terrible. And in fact, to quote Ronald Reagan, he said, as the family goes, so goes the culture, so goes society. And it's really, really bad. And Perry, same-sex marriage supporters will say, look, don't accuse us of destroying family and marriage, because heterosexuals and Christians have done a pretty good job of that themselves. And they have. That's absolutely right. Although that said, you look at 2,000 years of Western Judeo-Christian marriage, it did really well for about 1,960 years, right? I mean, these things like abortion and divorce and extramarital sex, I mean, a lot of these things are, by and large, recent blips on the historical radar. But even though Christians themselves have done a really good job of desacramentalizing, taking the sacredness out of marriage themselves, they could not succeed in redefining marriage. They never actually smashed the mold of male-female. What's so uniquely unsettling and dangerous, if you will, about same-sex marriage is it takes that male-female mold and it smashes it.
Yeah. Well, I gotta go.
This opens it up to all sorts of new arrangements and configurations.
Folks, get it. It's called Takedown. Paul, thank you. I love you. I just love what you have to say. I want to do more shows with you.
Oh, well, I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Hey, God bless you, pal. Hang in there, and we'll get together again soon, okay?
All right, Perry.
Thank you. Get the book. It's called Takedown. Look at it on Amazon, okay? Takedown, put out by WND Books. We'll see you next time on Focus Today.